Okay. I see the little symbol there. We're good.
Yeah.
We have one watcher already.
Welcome to Casual Podcast Friday. It's we're live. We're in person. We're hanging out. Friday, a little bit different day.
Sir.
Hanging out on the couch. We'll see how this goes. So, yeah, we're here and checking it out.
Number 16.
Yeah, number 16
How
for
about
us.
that?
So it's not bad actually. We're getting the hang of this thing.
Yep. Got Sammy here again.
Yeah, everybody's in flesh, right? Which is kind of nice.
I got to meet Sammy in person for the first time.
First time. Yeah.
Yeah, which is kind of funny
Almost
to
a
me.
year
You guys
over
have-
video.
Because I worked together for that long and have never met in person
Never
until
met in
yesterday.
person.
Until yesterday. Yep. Blame it on the pandemic.
That's
So,
right. That was pretty cool.
We're coming
He's
back.
taller than I thought he was.
Yeah. I got some height on there.
Yeah, you guys, like I said,
Some length.
taller next to right now. Oh, that's funny. Well, welcome to today's episode, number 16. We got a couple things to kind of go over. We got Kaseya in the news. We got Akamai. We got another dump of some files. Yeah, which one do you guys want to start with today?
I guess Kaseya, we can throw it up there if you want. I think what's interesting about the update with them right now is the Decryptor key that's universal that came out. So it was a third party that provided the key to them. They're very hush-hush about how they got the key, if you will. And then they claim another third party validated that the Decryptor tool was legitimate. So, like, do you trust that key? Well, the key, obviously, but the tool that comes in and helps you to decrypt it, or what else could happen down the road. And so I think the thing I would keep in mind is, 0.01% or is 0.1% of the customers were impacted, according to what I read. So it's a small percentage, but the idea that they've already been in there, they can still have the data from you, and then understanding that you could be under attack again, right? So 80% of the people that get hit with ransomware will be re-attacked within so many weeks, right? So I would keep that in mind if I use that Decryptor tool to make sure to get a backup of my data immediately.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I think people assume like, hey, I pay the thing, I'm free and clear. Like, no, you just buy yourself more time, really. Maybe a 2-week window, 3-week window. But that's a good point. Like if you do get that data back, and the first thing you gotta do is get it somewhere else, different storage, some other cloud, off-prem. Tape, we were kind of joking about that, like joking, not joking.
Oh yeah, tape is now cool again.
Tape's kind of making a comeback, I think. It's offline, you can't really monkey with it. Not a bad idea, actually. So, but yeah, I mean, I think this whole kind of, scenario as it plays out, it's kind of becoming a little political too, like with the Russia involvement, and then everything kind of disappearing, but. We were talking a little bit earlier. It's like, it's disappearing for now, but I mean, I think we all know it's going to rebrand itself as something else that kind of just, filed Chapter 11 internally, and it's just rebranding now. It's going to come back as some other gang front end, and we're going to see these things back in action in, I don't know, a couple of months or so, and things like that. So.
Oh yeah, they're criminals, right?
I don't
They're
think
not
right
going
was
to
yet.
disappear. They're going to be back.
Well, yeah, and with the success of this, it only incentivizes them to do it again. And then and another thing too is a lot of people think they pay the ransom, and this, like you guys were mentioning, that they think they won't happen to them again. But that just shows that your organization is willing to comply with the threat actors, and as a result, it kind of primes you for being a target.
Sets the behavior.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Expected behavior. So, like as we mentioned before, backups, but also test those backups, because that's the thing is if they don't work in practice, or when it actually comes time to restore, then you're gonna it's pretty much just like not having any in the first place. So that is that is a big thing. I think with this breach was that we saw that if you had those dedicated backups, you wouldn't really have had to worry about whether or not you received the key or not. So definitely a big one there.
Testing is always a often overlooked
yeah.
issue here that we have in this industry. Unfortunately, they want to test it after everything hits the fan, and it's like, it doesn't work. Well, okay, well, whose fault is that at that point, right?
Or the speed of recovery,
right?
A lot of people don't consider, oh yeah, I did all this recovery or all these backups, and I back up my 3,000 servers every night. Sure, you're doing incremental or differential backups, so you're getting a small amount of data. You're not doing that full backup every single night, right? Most backup softwares nowadays, that's how they operate. is they get that one full, they'll do synthetic fulls,
Yep.
which is really just that differential. So now you go back to recover all of that, and the time to get it back could be 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks
Right.
to get all the recoveries done across the whole enterprise. And so sometimes it makes sense from a business standpoint to pay the ransom to decrypt because it's taking so long to get that recovery done. So that's why it's important to have that time, start that stopwatch when you do these recovery drills, and understand what it's going to take to get you back up and running.
Yeah, that's particularly true when organizations don't necessarily know the critical components of their network or the aspects of their network that might that are basically priority when it comes to bringing their network back online, all the various dependencies. So if they don't know that it's going to take a lot longer to come back online, and then again, without system prioritization, it may be worth it just to pay the ransom, as the downtime would probably cost more in that event. So
that's where having like your IR plan, reviewing your IR plan, like that needs to be called out, right? I mean, kind of like now we're getting into a business decision, but it's like, to your point, it's like, hey, if it's going to take me 2 weeks to recover everything through my backups, but my business can only sustain a week's of downtime, well, that's a pretty big decision you have to make. Like, do you risk not coming back from this, or do you say, okay, hey, I'm going to pay the ransom to get up to speed quicker, and then fight with it that way? So it's a lot of ethical questions that come into this too. It's really a business decision, not so much a technology all the time.
Well, if you think like healthcare as an example, right? So a lot of the newer nurses and people that come in, they're not familiar with paper charting. They've never had to do it. They only did it electronic. And then the other piece of the pie is, can you actually go down in your systems, right? How do you process those credit cards? How do you take payments? And all the other things that pop up if you're, say, a retail organization, as an example. So it's a lot of things that people have to think about, and how they're going to handle that offline capability.
Yeah. Anyway, it's only going to get worse. I think ransomware, I mean, we all know it's here to stay. It's, we're kind of talking earlier, we see this like kind of massive trend in, the ransom side of things, the financial aspect, the, extortion of it all. So, I think we'll see this rebranded. It'll come back as something different, and it's here to stay, unfortunately. So
Sammy, do you think the Russian government really told that game to shut down as goodwill towards the U.S. right now?
I mean, it's certainly possible they asked them to. Whether they did that because they wanted to comply with that request is debatable. I think that really they could just be, what Derek just mentioned, rebranding, kind of reestablishing themselves. There is, I was thinking about this, there is some disadvantage to doing that, and the notoriety you build with a certain gang. I'm sure that
it's a brand, right?
Right, it's a brand, right. So while maybe we may not see them rebrand themselves, they might be reestablishing infrastructure. This might just be a temporary kind of band-aid to appease, us in the United States. But there's no guarantee. We have to rely on the good faith of the Russian government, which is, to do with that what you will. But so I think more than likely to avoid any kind of political ramifications, and to avoid any kind of retaliation from the U.S. government, Revo complied kind of in the short term, but I fully expect to see them back up.
It's kind of laying low right now.
Exactly.
Let some things die over.
Right. Yeah, because I mean, if you think about the Colonial Pipeline attack, it's immediately after that happened, they kind of went into that defensive kind of passive state, and as
it was almost like apologetic, like, hey, we're sorry, like this wasn't really our business model, which was interesting.
We're only going to charge you $5 million.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a good deal at that point, right? Who knows? So, yeah, good stuff. All right, let's see. We also have Akamai in the news, if you want to call it that. Lots of good stuff there. I think a lot of down Detector, Reddit, everything was Twitter was going bananas with a lot of major outages. We have PlayStation. I just have a list like HBO, UPS, Steam, Airbnb, LastPass. That's an interesting one. Discover, Salesforce, Vanguard, just a whole bunch of slew of things, right? So
my favorite was Home Depot. How am I gonna order all my stuff at my expensive lumber prices right now?
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah, but is that going to spike the price of lumber even more?
It's possible, right?
Well, they stated it wasn't the result of a cyber attack, and it was actually a result of a bug that got pushed during their patch cycles. So that's interesting. Whether the legitimacy of that or not, is hard to state. But if we take their word for it, that's interesting, and it was primarily in their DNS servers. So
I was gonna say, was it the network or was it DNS?
I think it's our friend's DNS.
Oh, it's DNS this time.
I think Reese, we have a picture of our favorite DNS, right? But yeah, it's this thing always cracks me up. Like poor DNS is like often overlooked, always blamed, and it was interesting though about DNS is like if you kind of think about this, like it's a really huge core aspect of like the internet and like how things really work and how vulnerable like it can still really be and abused, and I know it's used in engineering aspects and breaches and how you siphon data out, and it's such like a core component that I'm not sure what the answer is, but it's definitely something that needs to be looked at holistically, really taken seriously from a stability, security, scalability standpoint, because it is it's the phone book of the internet is the best way to describe it, right?
So that's how I always describe it.
Yeah, I tell people all the time, like if I don't know your number and I'm trying to call Brian, like, sorry Brian,
go look it up.
I don't know your number.
Right.
Yeah, look it up, man. Every time I call you, right? So, things like that, and with like these large companies like Akamai and a few others out there that are so spread out and they touch so many different points of presence in the world. It's just a huge thing, and this is the slight downside to really cloud scale and this and that, but to me, this isn't like a knock on cloud or anything. It's still by far in leaps and bounds better, in my opinion, than you trying to build these things yourself and do it on prem or build it in house. But it just is a downside where you can take down so many customers, if you will, with a simple DNS. I don't say simple, but a DNS type issue, right? So
creates
bad stuff.
Pretty critical single point of failure if when you do rely on a lot of these or a single cloud provider for your services. And you actually mentioned it in the call earlier how now people are starting to use different combinations of GCP, Azure, and just the various CDN providers to kind of mitigate the risk of one of these vendors going under and being able to migrate or to revert to another infrastructure that lives in a different environment. It kind of acts as its own redundancy, its own fail-safe. So that's an interesting thing to bring up as well. Interesting point.
So you use an Akamai to help you get speed or content delivery out faster. So should you be evaluating multi-vendor strategies for an Akamai?
I guess you could look at it that way. Whether it's that's probably a little bit deeper into the conversation about your content delivery and how close your users are and things like that, but at least for maybe core services around DNS or have a structure in place to where you say, hey, if my, I won't say primaries kind of go down, but just a design aspect to say, hey, maybe I'm multi-cloud, I'm kind of multi-tiered in there, provider A, provider B as your backup type of a thing, where you might lose some speed, if you will, or caching ability or that kind of perception, but at least it'll be up. So I think it comes down to design, and really people now would design for, hey, if I lose path A or path B or a router or a firewall, a server, now it's like you have to design for like what if I lose my cloud A, does my cloud B pick it up? So it's a different mentality and maybe designing, but conceptually it's the same way. So
millions of dollars were lost.
Oh
through this outage with all of these companies that couldn't transact. Doesn't mean that they won't recoup some of that because people might come back later on, but there's definitely a brand impact from that. So something else that back in the day as a director, not that long ago, but when you would negotiate these contracts and SLAs, they made it almost impossible to get money back. Right, and it would never exceed the amount that you would pay for the service. So that's always interesting with SLAs and things like that. So I wonder if they'll have to pay anything out to their customers, if they'll be able to file for it, or if they're going to automatically get credit back, or how that's going to work.
I'm sure they're all in a bunch of PR right now. All these companies, I guarantee you, are calling Akamai and their rep and their
Right.
team, like, okay, hey, check, like you said, checking your SLAs, checking your SLOs. That's why these contracts are really important, right? I mean, like, not to go into too much detail, but like your third parties and this and that, definitely read the contract, understand who's at risk if one of those people gets breached, and kind of lets you in that way. And this is just another SaaS type service that you have to understand what are you objectified to and what are you held to. And like you said, obviously they don't want to make it easy for you to get their money back, but at a certain point there's also the whole brand recognition, right? Because I think you were kind of saying, like, even like Reddit and Twitter was just going crazy yesterday with like PlayStation, a bunch of things and whatnot. So people take to the internet now and just kind of jokingly frustrate, but there is a reputation there with it all. So
something else to think about too is that it's very easy in the cloud. So you go to one of your main providers like AWS or Azure or GCP, and you can go in and pick your content provider in Akamai.
Right.
It's usually one of the providers up there. So did you even consider any of that third-party risk when you went to the marketplace?
Yeah.
Did you just check the box, agree to the service terms, and off you go, because it's billing against your Amazon or your Azure billing and consumption? So that's something else to think about.
Or the question is, did your developers even care about that? They said, oh, I want this, click the box, but your business was like, hey, wait, maybe we should rethink this. So,
right. Or you didn't have that SLA in place because you just checked the box.
Yeah.
Instead of having that direct contract.
Mm-hmm.
So just because it's easy to go consume it, I mean, that's originally all the shadow IT we used to talk about.
Yeah.
Originally, it's still out there. It's just in a marketplace now. It's kind of hidden in a little wrapper, if you will, that makes it easy to consume all of this.
Yeah, exactly. Good stuff.
Yeah, I think that's why people are going to have to look at their vendor risk management programs and start to mature those, not just from like a security perspective, but also, like you said, from reputationally, who are the organizations you're working with, and what is their hygiene? Like when anybody contracts a third-party cloud provider, I think the last thing they think about is, oh, are these guys doing regular assessments, and are they compliant with this standard? So I think it's also doing diligence, and before you enable something in the environment, it's like do your DD, do your research on the organization you're working with, because even organizations like Akamai tend to have can still be afflicted by these types of bugs. So it's a conversation of vendor risk as well.
Yeah. And I think some of that too is like, almost I would say like less IT and more of your like GRC and your risk. So you kind of have two different departments almost, going for that. But there needs to be a tighter control on that. So like your point, saying, hey, what are my obligations with my partners and my third parties, and like, are they holding me accountable, and vice versa, as opposed to just the technology aspects. So it's important.
Well, in summary, it was DNS, so there you go.
It's always DNS, unfortunately. When in doubt, check DNS. I can't tell you as a network guy how many times it's like been proven guilty. It's like, no, man, like, I guarantee you it's DNS. No, it's not DNS, not DNS. Are you sure about this? Like, here's all my proof. Okay, you're right, it's DNS.
It's
like,
DNS.
Yeah, it's DNS.
Yeah.
It's either DNS or the firewall.
Oh, I don't know how many times I've had to defend the network over my career.
Yeah.
It wasn't the network. It was
guilty until innocent.
Yeah.
You're this or that or whatever. But anyways.
Some things never change, as it seems.
Cloud scale doesn't matter. It's all the core. Well, yeah, like you said, it's DNS, BGP. Like, these are core foundations of the internet.
Yeah.
They haven't changed in 30-something years, right?
So yeah.
Here we are.
Just like your QR code, right?
Yeah. There we go. No more QR codes, please.
Yeah.
All right, so Saudi Aramco with their 1 terabyte of stolen data for sale. This is just mind-boggling to me that something as large that they are, and probably all the solutions and the security and stuff that they have in place, that a terabyte of data could disappear from their network. I think a lot of times we don't consider that outbound traffic flow, right? I can think on my hands all the time that I would log in a firewall and it was always focused on all the downloading of data, that I was always wondering, where is all this data going?
Yeah.
Right? When you look on that counter that's going outbound, and are you really investigating it and going through and seeing what's happening from that? Because it's not just the USB sticks that people put in anymore, right? And those are more or less used to inject data into a network or whatnot, right? So, I mean, is this going to be the next Stuxnet down the road? Because all these schematics and everything got leaked out, and now people have an idea on
there's
how to get stuff in there.
Like, I think I was reading it had like like GPS coordinates, SCADA, IPs, network maps. There was the pictures of the actual schematics of a couple of plants. Like,
oh yeah,
a lot of data in there. A lot of data.
I don't know why they're all blurred out, but I mean, obviously they have pictures of some of this stuff.
Yeah.
But
I think you bring up a good point, right? I mean, if I kind of use the analogy, it's like you're trying to prevent someone from breaking into your house. Okay, cool, that's great. But let's just say someone's like into your house and they're taking your TV. You're like just saying, okay, like here, like let me hold the door for you while you take my TV.
Right.
You know, so you got to kind of look at both sides, right? In versus out. So.
Yeah, you need to be able to monitor those behaviors, and so yeah, like a DLP solution or something where you're tracking large amounts of data being exfiltrated from your environment should raise some red flags. Like a terabyte is not a small amount of data to.
No, that's
to your point. That should have been easily detected, right? And especially with a company like this, and then particularly these controls should be in environments where these OT systems are located, right?
Yeah.
And that's what's scary to me is it's like you guys pulled a terabyte worth of data from across all parts of the organization, which means you guys had full access to every part of the network, or they had terrible segmentation. One of the two, because it's like you're getting varied pieces of data, which is indicative.
It's that segmentation keyword, like where's our little buzzer or bell?
Right.
Yeah, those green screen.
That's one of our favorites, right? We have MFA, segmentation.
It's like take a drink.
Yeah, no. So to that point, you know, that I think that's a fault in the internal SOC. If they didn't at least detect the activity. Now they're looking at like a $50 million extortion.
Yeah. And what's crazy here is there's no reported ransomware.
Right. That's what I say. It's not really a ransomware.
It's all about the extortion at this point.
Which, like we were kind of saying earlier, it's like almost a new, I don't say new, but kind of becoming more popular business model.
Yes.
Like, hey, you know what? Maybe like less ransomware. Now more just extortion. I mean, will that work for every single, you know, maybe industry and company? Probably not. But these, you know, high tech, you know, anything with IP or PII, I mean, I want to say they would have 61,000 employees or something like that. So quite a bit of information out there.
Yep. And that's one reason people pay the ransom is because they want it deleted off the internet.
Exactly.
Right? Or
it's more about that than anything
else. Hope that it gets deleted off the internet.
Yeah, and to be honest,
if you believe that.
The number for the extortion was, for considering who Saudi Aramco is, pretty low, because I mean they're like the most profitable company on the planet, with like $50 billion in profits.
50 million seems like, you know,
a drop in the bucket, right?
It's probably someone's expense report, some of these things.
Exactly.
Yeah, all those executive dinners, huh? Add up. And so they think they claimed it was a 0-day exploit that they initially got compromised, but that's a very
it's still
safe thing to say. Yeah.
Well, I think it was kind of that, and they're also maybe blaming like a third-party contractor as well as part of this one too.
That's right. Yeah.
The HVAC guy gets in, and there you go.
Maybe. You know,
ouch.
Who knows?
Well, I know that they had to wipe over 30,000 systems back in 2012, so maybe there's something known about the environment back then.
Yeah, I mean, you figure like a environment that big, that large, I mean, just needs a lot of care and feeding and constant, you know, supervision. So, you know, as you scale, obviously, you know, you have a lot of points in the network, a lot of holes, and a lot of places to kind of, you know, patch and watch. So it can be very cumbersome, and that's where, you know, the best practices and the DLPs and segmentation and like everything has to be in place on those. You can't just have one or the other. It's like you got to be checking all your boxes and things like that. So
that's why it's important to have a baseline.
Yeah.
Right? Run a security assessment, have that pen test and the vulnerability data so that you have that baseline to continue forward. Mm-hmm. Right? A pen test alone is not going to just solve all your issues because the next attacker could get in a different vector or whatever the case is. But it makes you aware of it. You start building a program wrapped around it, and you continue to mitigate and reduce your risk. Because it's that whole continuous life cycle that you're really trying to build through your security program. So.
Yeah, and then you also eliminate those very low-hanging fruit kind of attack vectors, and then you leave, and those, by going through those engagements several times, things like MFA, things like segmentation, they'll be addressed, you know, they'll be exploited at that point in time, whereas now you're waiting for a live scenario to be able to basically uncover the faults in the environment. It's like, you know, if you had been proactive about the approach and done the pen testing, the segmentation, the MFA, it's likely that the amount of data and the spread of data would be a lot less. So, because to me the biggest thing here is that the spread of data, the type of data, it indicates that they had access to all kinds of systems. So.
Yeah, I think that's actually interesting. Is Brian, you always say this. It's like you got to know like what's your core prime data, know where it is, like the whole crown jewel aspect, right? Who has access to it, and stuff like this. Schematics and those types of things. To me, those would be hot items, crown jewels. So it's like, where are they stored? Who's got access to them?
Where's your critical
does
data?
Everybody need access to it?
Privilege
escalation. The company this size, I'm sure, has a lot of permissions and just legacy things in there, some technical debt. So.
Oh well, the technical debt is a big piece of the pie, right? So stuff that's been there a long time, probably a lot of politics involved because of how many layers of management and everything else that's engaged.
Companies this size for sure, right?
And then just all those computer file shares and stuff that probably have no permissions applied to them. And that's part of the thing with the legacy systems when you migrate to new cloud systems, that sometimes you can clean up and put the structures in place, but then you can't get rid of the old legacy one still hanging around, so it kind of causes all that risk, right?
Yeah, and that's where I think it comes down to really, and there was this hilarious meme that Derek shared earlier about asset management. Like, you can't really do cybersecurity without understanding your assets and then basically triaging those assets, because then you also reduce the overhead of you basically just maintaining a strong cybersecurity posture, because now, sure, the user environment may be littered with vulnerabilities, but if the proper controls are in place to where they cannot easily move from the user environment to a critical environment, well, now it's like, maybe they did compromise you, but the impact was basically nothing, right? And that's because you understood where your assets are. Those assets are highly controlled, whether it be through whitelisting, segmentation, all these controls that we constantly talk about on here. And then from there, you really only have to focus on that subset, and so the resource requirement for maintaining that is a lot lower. So people talk about the budget in cybersecurity. Well, it's like, okay, well then reduce your attack surface, reduce the amount of stuff that you have to worry about. If it's all together, then when it comes compliance time or assessment time, it's everything's fair game, and then it's a way bigger time. Imagine you're a 60,000 person company and you have to assess 60,000 assets at a minimum. Well, how about you take the 1,000 assets that are important, put them in the most highly secured part of the environment and assess just that. Well, again, your overhead just got reduced. So
that's a good point.
Asset management's the number one place to start. You walk into a place and they don't have any cybersecurity program. We got to know what the assets are.
Correct.
To start with, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's so true, and I think your point about the scope reduction is key, right? I mean, like we do a lot of that with, like when we go to a customer and we're talking about, let's say PCI, and they say, hey, I want to scan PCI, and everyone freaks out because it's like, well, the way you have this built, like everything's in scope,
right?
And it's like, okay, how do we take this and, like you said, let's put it in its own little bunker, isolate it, and it's like, hey, now only this is in scope, right? And it greatly reduces the risk. It's better for auditing, like it's controlled, so. Again, it kind of comes back to that segmentation, your zones, and all that kind of good stuff around it. So it's just,
because it's like, you impacted the user network, or you hacked the user network. Okay, that's bad. You might be able to get some PII, and you might be able to even leverage that to get into other parts of the network. But the initial impact is now mitigated, at least the risk, tremendously by not having those same systems on it. And PCI is a great example when people are like, what's the easiest way to pass PCI? It's like, don't have anything in scope, you know what I mean?
You're not wrong.
The less the better, right?
Right,
Less is more in a lot of those cases, right? Especially for PCI. Like we could probably do a whole show on just PCI alone. But.
And I think that's just really the trick with bigger orgs is I think they just have to spend a lot of time triaging and just a lot of time managing those assets and then just getting it down to as small as possible. So it's it's a lot of different devices to kind of keep in consideration. So
that's the one, I guess, major downside to a company like that large. There's just so much out there, right? It's just.
Yeah, well, them too. They probably have a lot of dependency on legacy OT stuff, because it's like, I mean, I personally don't know how a lot of these like oil drilling systems work, but I can imagine some of this stuff's pretty old. Probably not patching it every.
Yeah, it doesn't probably get upgraded that often.
Right. You know, so it's.
The analogy I always use.
The segmentation with those systems.
What's that?
Yeah. How goes the segmentation?
Yeah.
Or none, right? You know, OT is another. SCADA systems, OT. It's a different world, right? And it can be very, very locked down. And you know, we have a lot of customers that deal with that, so it's an interesting approach and. You're going to be very, very secure with that.
Even if, you know, you have to have whatever legacy system in there, it's like if you can't reach it or it's only accessible by certain management networks or devices, then it's like, okay, well,
air-gapped and things like that.
Mitigate it a little bit. So the excuse of like we have to have these systems is not necessarily good enough. It's like there's still other mitigating controls.
Yeah.
So.
Or like you always say, it's like, do these systems even need to talk to anything? Like, can they really be on their own island?
Exactly. Yeah.
Why do your servers need internet access? Do
they really? Turn it off, right?
DNS exfiltration. Let's go back a story, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, it can be annoying, but it's certainly more secure, right? It's like offline patching.
Well, it's always the pros and cons. Like it's the ease of use and security. It's like the ever-ending struggle of like you can make things easy, but wide open, or like super locked down and like nobody can do anything. So it's always this.
Yep, functionality versus usability, right?
Best security in the world is just unplug it.
Turn it off.
Right. It's secure, ain't going nowhere.
How do I make this iPad the securest that it can be? Turn it off.
Don't use it,
Exactly.
Right?
So don't put any data on it.
Yeah.
So something I would be concerned about as we wrap up here, I guess, is apparently the list of the clients got out along with invoices and contracts, right?
Employee
and so
data, passports.
Go back to the VEC that we've talked about internally a couple of times, or the VEC. Right, so vendor email compromise or business email compromise. I would be really concerned about that in this case.
Oh yeah.
And then invoices being sent out in the wrong ACH information or send the check to this address type of situation occurring in this case. So I would really put my guard up on a lot of this stuff if I was a contractor or a vendor.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. I think just in general, from like what we've seen just in the last, I don't know, couple months, like a really big uptick in VEC right now. So it's kind of making a little surge come back. So if for those of you out there listening, just, you know, keep your defenses up. You know, it is making a comeback right now. So trust but verify, even from a known source. You know, always call the person if you think, hey, accounting sent me some weird email. Why are they contacting me? They want to change my number. Definitely call them and verify that one. So it's coming back.
Because a lot of the tension gets put on like 0 days because that's what makes the news cycle, and to be fair, they do have big impact because it tends to affect a lot of orgs and people, but I think a more common initial foothold is through things like
for sure,
attacks,
100%. It's so easy to do, and it's so relevant.
And it looks legitimate. You can go look at the email headers, and it came from their system.
Well, yeah, that's right. You could if you happen to get like access to a good amount of them, you could try 1,000 times. There is no detection mechanism for a legitimate email.
Shotgun approach.
Yeah, exactly, right. So it's like, you know, I could just keep trying with different emails till eventually you only need one to land. So
it just takes one.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that kind of wraps up our show for today. So thanks for joining us on Casual Friday, you know, kind of thing.
From the couch.
We'll see how this works out. And if you don't forget, subscribe, like. Give us some comments on the feedback maybe of in-person versus the virtual. I kind of like the in-person thing here. So
also the content you guys want to hear more of.
Yeah,
you guys want to hear more.
If it works out, we'll keep going this way. And take care, everybody. Thanks.
See you next time. Bye bye.